Hello and welcome back to my channel. In the previous video, we defined the UrlShortener resource and we implemented the two methods, the getUrlShortener and the createUrlShortener. In this video, we are gonna write the unit test and integration test cases for our resource class. Let's start and follow my steps. Open the UrlShortener resource class and create the UrlShortener resource test. In the pop-up window, select the two methods, the getUrlShortener and the createUrlShortener. On top of the class UrlShortener resource test, add the Quarkus test annotation. In this class, we are going to write the unit test cases. So first, let's inject with the annotation inject the UrlShortener resource. Then the UrlShortener resource is use the service, the UrlShortener service that we implemented in the previous video. Because of that, we need to mock our service. To do that, we can use the annotation provided by Quarkus inject mock. As we can see, for the moment we don't have this annotation ready to use because we need to add the specific Maven dependency. Open the pom.xml file and add a new Maven dependency. The group ID is io.quarkus, the artifact ID is Quarkus JUnit5 Mockito, and the scope is test. Good, let's import this dependency in our project. Perfect, now let's go back inside our resource test class and let's import the annotation inject mock. Under the annotation inject mock, we need to define the UrlShortener service. This service is annotated with the singleton annotation. To mock it, we need to add also the properties convert scopes equal true. Now we are ready to write the unit test cases. Let's start with the getUrlShortener. I'm going to rename it in getUrlShortener found. The first thing to do is to create a new UrlShortener. Let's put as alias a string like my alias and as URL just https myalias.com. If we take a look inside the getURL method, we can see that when the URL has been found, this method returns a response with the status code moved permanently. Specify also a new header property, the location, equal to the getURL. As we can see, this method is using the getUrlShortener method coming from the service, so we need to mock it. Inside the then return, let's put optional dot of UrlShortener. Now let's check that our UrlShortener resource is not null, and then we can invoke the getUrlShortener. As input, let's put the string myalias, and then let's check the response object. First, we are going to check that the response object is not null, then that the status code is equals to moved permanently, and then let's check that the properties location inside the header is equal to our URL that we define, meaning https myalias.com. Perfect. Now we can write the other test cases. So let me just copy and paste this method, rename it in getUrlShortener not found. Let the getUrlShortener of the service class return an empty object. And in this case, we can just check that the status code is not anymore moved permanently, but not found. That's it. We cover the two possible test cases. Open the terminal. Remember that we already ran the project in development mode in the previous video, so the only thing to do right now is to type R in order to rerun all the unit test cases. Perfect. As we can see, all the 22 tests are passing, including our getUrlShortener test cases. Now let's take a look of the createUrlShortener inside the resource class. Inside this method, we check that the input is not null, otherwise we throws a URL shortener exception. If the input is OK, this method invokes the createURlShortener inside the service class and stores the output, meaning the entire list of URL shortener, inside a response object with the status code OK. Let's go back inside our resource test class. We need to write two unit test cases. In the first one, we invoke the createURlShortener method of the resource class, passing a null as input. So in this case, we need to check that the createURlShortener will throws a URL shortener exception. We can put this just in one line. Perfect. In the second unit test case, we have to first define the input, the URL shortener DTO. Let's put as alias the string myalias, for example, and as URL https myalias.com. Then we need to mock the createURlShortener coming from the service class. So in this case, let's simulate that this method will return an empty array list. Then we can finally type UrlShortenerResource.createURlShortener, passing as input the DTO that we created. We store the response and then we check the response. First, we have to check that the response is not null. Second, we have to check that the status code of this response is equal to OK, 200. And then we can check that the entity inside this response is not null. Perfect. Now open the terminal, type again R to rerun all the unit test cases, and now we can see that all 23 tests are passing. Very good. Now we can move to the second part of this video, meaning the implementation of the UrlShortenerResource integration test class. Again, open the UrlShortenerResource, and inside the pop-up window, let's again select the two methods, the getURlShortener and createURlShortener. Always put the Quarkus test annotation on top of the class name, followed by the annotation test method order, because inside the integration test, we're gonna run the test cases with a specific order. We will see it in a moment. Before writing and running the getURlShortener test case, we're gonna write and run the createURlShortener to create at least one item. For the createURlShortener method, we're gonna write two different test cases. One of them in order to send the URL not null, and the other one to send a null object. Also for the getURlShortener, we're gonna write and run two different test cases. One to get the URL created previously, and the other one to test the not found response. Let's define the order of all test cases with the annotation order. The createURlShortener, we will have the order annotation with the value 1. It will be the first test case to run. After that, the createURlShortener with order value 2. The getURlShortener and getURlShortener not found with value 2, because we can run the 3 test cases in parallel without any problem. The important thing is make the createURlShortener runs before the others. Perfect. Inside the test case createURlShortener not null, we have to define the JSON object to send inside the post request. We use the object mapper to create the JSON item, defining the field alias with the name myaliasIT and the field URL with the value, let's put for example http www.google.com. Then let's write and test our request to the UrlShortener API using wiremock. Type given, then specify the content type as application JSON, the JSON item inside the body, the API to call, in this case the post, and then let's check the response. We're gonna check the status code that must be OK, 200, and then the body of the response. Because the API sent back the entire list of UrlShortener item, we can check that the size of this list must be equal to 1, just the item that we added. That's it, very simple. For the create URL shortener null test case, we can copy this part of the code and paste here, and removing the JSON item and the status code from OK to bad request, because we want to test the behavior to send a null item to the API. The get URL shortener test case will be simple as well. We're gonna send a get response to the URL shortener API, sending the alias myURlIT used previously. In this test case, we have just to check that the response code is equal to OK 200. As we can imagine, for the get URL shortener not found test case, we can quickly copy and paste this code and change the alias from myURlIT to a wrong one, like for example alias not found, and then check that the status code is not found. Now open the terminal, type again R. Perfect. All our 27 tests that we implemented so far are passing, including the integration test cases in this class. Until now, we store the URL shorten items inside an array list. It would be perfect to store them inside a database. Let's discover how to do that inside the next video, part 6. Thank you so much for watching this video. Subscribe to my channel to be always updated about new videos that I will upload, and see you in the next video. Bye.